Hello, and today on Phone a Friend we'll be talking with Devakar Epari. He is the head of the medical engineering at QUT, so he's going to give us some good guidance especially for first years about how you structure your course and how to approach studying medical engineering. And then we'll also talk to him about his project where he works on a fracture fixation plate. So have a listen and enjoy. Hello, today we're here with Devakar Epari. He is the senior lecturer with QUT's medical engineering. How are you doing, Devakar?
Very well, thanks.
Good. So first, we're going to talk about just generally medical engineering studies. It's like what kind of guidance you can give people, and then we'll go into your project in the fracture fixation plate. For our first question, we just want to ask you, if you could choose your last meal, what would be on your plate?
My last meal?
Yeah.
Oof. At the moment, probably teriyaki chicken.
Teriyaki chicken.
I'm just loving that at the moment.
Yeah. So for medical engineering, could you just briefly describe what is medical engineering, just for people looking into getting into the degree?
Yeah, sure. So medical engineering, like most fields of engineering, is really broad. Medical engineering or biomedical engineering, in fact, there's a lot of names thrown around for it, bioengineering. What we consider it to be here at QUT is engineering applied to medical devices, but that covers the whole spectrum from early stage development of new devices right through to maintenance and end of life of existing medical technologies. So of course many areas, there's research, design and development, asset management, sort of clinical engineering, rehabilitation engineering, which is more working with individuals to customise assistive technologies. So there are jobs in a whole range of areas from academia and research institutions for that sort of early stage. Of course, medical device companies sort of managing their products that are on the market. Clinical engineering and rehabilitation engineering in hospitals, looking after the technology in those places. People often ask what the difference is between biomedical and medical engineering. I think those terms are pretty much synonymous. Yeah. At QUT, we decided to call it medical engineering some years back, before my time. But the reason for that is because we have a focus on medical devices, and that's what we wanted to get across in the name, and not so much confused with terms like bioengineering, which can tend to extend into things like waste management and brewing of beer and things like that. Biotechnology is another term that sometimes gets thrown in there. And so at QUT, medical engineering means engineering related to the whole life cycle of medical devices.
Perfect, yeah, because there is a lot of confusion, especially when you go to other universities like UNSW, stuff like that, where you see biomedical and people get confused about what's what, so that's a really good distinction. So what are the different course options for medical engineering? What are the different ways you can do it, and what would you recommend?
Yeah, so this is something that changed recently in the offerings at QUT. Previously we had a medical engineering major, which was a set program of study. I think there was maybe one unit of choice, but in the recent reconfiguration of the degree, that opened up the opportunity for quite a bit of flexibility for all the engineering programs. That means currently you can study medical engineering as your first major, and that provides some flexibility in the second area of study, sometimes what we refer to as study area B. And in that study area you can take either a second major or two minors. Maybe we'll get into in a moment what some of the combinations could be, but before we do that, I think the default option for a lot of people should probably be considering a first major in mechanical engineering and a second major in medical. Mm-hmm. That still exposes you to all of our medical engineering units, but you're seen to have less of a specialisation in quite a niche field. And for some people that's attractive. They're not 100% sure whether they're going to go down a medical engineering pathway. They've shown some interest in it, so they get exposure to those units that we offer. But it still provides them with a very broad engineering degree, which allows them to go in a lot of directions upon graduation. And maybe makes it a little bit easier if you're going in a non-medical direction. But I don't think it makes it any harder if you do decide to go in a medical direction.
Because you can be an electrical engineer and work in medical.
Exactly. A lot of people from mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and other fields of engineering work in the medical sector. So that's nothing new. But it can be, for some employers, a little bit... They may not be so familiar with what is a medical engineering degree if you go and apply for a mechanical engineering job that's non-medical related.
You might have to try and justify yourself more than you would have to if you...
Perhaps, and with things these days, a lot of bigger companies are using automated HR systems.
Yeah.
And if you apply for a mechanical engineering job, but your degree is medical engineering, that can impose a barrier.
Yeah.
I think there are ways to get around that, and it's about how you market yourself. A lot of the graduate outcomes are common to all engineering programs. Things like communication, understanding of technology and engineering fundamentals, problem-solving skills. These things are developed across all the engineering programs. It's then important in how you market yourself, how you get in the foot in the door for those different types of opportunities. So coming back to, so that's mechanical engineering with a second major in medical. Of course, there's also the opportunity, as we've had in the past, to do a first major in medical engineering.
Yeah.
That can also be combined with a second major in mechanical engineering, if you want to keep those two quite aligned. But there's also electrical engineering second major that can be combined with mechatronics. I think those two options are quite solid options, since a lot of medical devices these days have electromechanical components to them. So having more than just mechanical engineering can be advantageous. I think what students need to be aware of and careful about is picking some of the more obscure minors and combining with medical engineering. And I would encourage people to seek advice, talk to people before selecting things that maybe are not so common in their matchup. Business is another good thing, I think, to combine.
Yeah.
Obviously, with a lot of engineering jobs, there's, business knowledge is important. There are business roles involved in industry. I think if you strain away from the major ones, so talk to your major coordinator, subject area coordinator, or other contacts, and get their input.
Yeah. And I think it's really, it's as you get further into it, you kind of realise the different areas you can go in medical engineering, and if you find that you're pulled to one area, you can then tailor yourself towards that area. But if you're not sure, it's probably better to give yourself that broader scope by doing a mechanical or medical with electrical or mechanical or something like that.
And of course, we shouldn't forget double degree combinations as well. Yeah. So one thing when the degree was reconfigured was about being able to combine better with double degrees. In that case, the second study area that you normally have gets shared with the second degree.
Yeah.
So you have maybe your first major in medical engineering, but then you can combine it with a degree in, say, science.
Yeah.
And get a double degree in 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think for some areas particularly areas like new concept development, new medical devices, these are areas that people should really be thinking about as well, combining with, if you're interested in, for example, tissue engineering and biofabrication and those sort of things, biomaterials, combining medical engineering with a physics or chemistry degree could be really help you out. You'll get much more depth in the sciences that underpin those new emerging disciplines than you do through, just the engineering program itself. Of course, you can also, again, combine with business, I think law as well, which some people do to go in the direction of maybe patent attorneys and things like that.
Regulations, stuff like that,
Yeah. So...
I've heard a lot of people if they're really interested in research, they've been pulled towards doing biotechnology and the minor in biotech, I believe, and that kind of pull people out because they get a lot of really good experience as far as using lab equipment. Is that also something you would recommend for people? Or?
I think how you've described it there is probably where the benefit is if you're going in the direction of, tissue engineering and you're working with cell cultures, combining them with materials, you may pick up some lab skills and things there. I think those things are nothing that you can't learn on the job later on, and if you're going in that direction, you're likely doing postgraduate studies, a master's or PhD, where you're going to pick up those skills.
You'll pick it up anyway.
Yeah. So whether that's, again, I think if you're very focused and you know which direction you're going in and it's likely going to involve postgraduate study towards research, then yes, combining with things like biotechnology might be quite useful. For those people who are not quite sure which direction they were going to go, I'd probably steer towards, I guess, the more vanilla varieties. We have combinations, mechanical, electrical.
So it gives you more options.
And of course, with the impact of IT on healthcare and in clinical engineering and things like that, certainly software, information technology can also be useful combinations as well.
Do you think there are any areas of the minors or majors that are not being pursued as much that should be?
I think when I look at the spread, I see that students are taking advantage of that flexibility that's being provided. If anything, I think maybe more so than what I would expect. And I can't say whether it's too much, because that's an individual decision, case by case. All I can say is it kind of surprises me. I thought more people would have been sticking closer to the mechanical first major, medical second, to give them that, I guess, generality and ability to go in different directions and to different sectors as well. But at the same time, most people get into medical because they're interested in medical.
Well, I think it's really good the point you made that you can do mechanical first and medical second, and it won't make any difference if you still want to go into medical. It won't change whether, I did medical first, and you're going to go to a job and they're like, oh, you're not, fully medical. It's not
exactly. Like I don't think there are any employers that really look at it, and when a medical job is advertised, you'll get a lot of applicants coming from different backgrounds. And I think because medical engineering is a small field, things like what you've done extracurricular and things like that play a lot more into your application than just what your degree title is. They're
definitely looking for those versatility of skills. So what do you see as an academic you wish students would do more of?
So I get to witness how students approach their learning, and things haven't changed that much since from when I was a student, and I wish students would take a different approach that I was probably guilty of to some extent as well, and that was learning to pass assessments rather than learning to master the content. So I wish students would engage with the content beyond just what's important for the next assessment item, and try and take on and grab as much from the content in the units that's been provided as possible, and master it, as much of it as possible, because it'll save you time down the track. You won't have to go back and learn these things outside of uni again. I really saw this when I did my postgraduate work in Germany and worked alongside German engineers. They just seemed to recall and know how to do stuff from their undergraduate degrees much better. Like I was always scratching, I think I did something like that, but had to go back and relearn it. And I think that had to do with this element of being very focused on, all right, I've got this exam, cramming in order to do that, or this assignment, and just doing whatever I need to get the grades in that, rather than week by week really trying to absorb and take on what's being presented.
I think that's the thing that a lot of students are guilty of, is that not focusing on what's this week, especially early on in your semester. This week, what am I learning? Trying to recap it and be like, all right, do I get this? Before moving on for the next week. Because sometimes you just, all right, I'm just kind of like, you're running through everything, and then you get to an assessment and you kind of have to go back and scramble and find everything. So okay, so definitely.
And I think the danger in that, particularly with a niche field like medical or a competitive field like medical is the piece of paper alone is not going to necessarily open up all these doors for you. You've got to be able to demonstrate to employers in interviews that you know the field, that you know your topics and things like that. So, and we try to generate a lot of assessments that are real world based and things like that that will provide students the opportunities to use what they've done in those to talk to employers about that sort of work as well.
Okay, cool. So now we'll just talk about your interesting project on the fracture fixation plate. If you could just briefly describe what is your project and what makes it different from what's out there.
Yes, so I guess there's a bit of background. At a university, well, I went into postgraduate doing research in a hospital setting, and that's where I got into the area of trauma and research of bone healing and biomechanics of fixation. And I spent about 10 to 15 years in that area researching, better understanding how bone heals and what the mechanical influences on that process are. So out of that we learned what bone needs to heal well, and we've known for some time that it's a combination of blood supply. Obviously it needs the nutrients and things in order to repair itself, but it also needs the right mechanical environment. And we spent a long time kind of getting a good understanding of what exactly composes that ideal mechanical environment and when during the course of healing we need to provide stability or stimulation in order to get a bone to heal. And when we looked at recently what currently available fixation devices were providing, we saw that the devices in the form that they take had done along to address the biology. How can we do less damage during surgery, for example? How can we preserve as much biology to create a good healing potential? But we'd done very little in terms of optimizing the biomechanics, in terms of minimising healing disturbances and reducing the rate of hardware failures for implants. So out of our research, my research, this new concept was developed which was focused on improving the biomechanics of fixation, providing an ideal mechanical environment, because fractures need some relative movement in order to heal. No movement and they tend to be understimulated and there's no healing response. Too much movement and you get the formation of a large callus, but it doesn't heal. It almost resembles like a joint.
Okay.
And so there's this window. And what current fixation devices did was they were very variable depending on how the surgeon configured them. And so it was very difficult to be sure of whether you were providing this optimal environment. So what's different about the device that we developed is it has a feature within the plate that creates, if you like, a biphasic stiffness. And what that does is it keeps the motion in the fracture within a very tight range for a very wide applied load, weight-bearing range.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter how the surgeon fixates the plate, it doesn't matter whether the patient is light or heavy, partial weight-bearing or full weight-bearing, the fracture sees an ideal range of motion to stimulate the right form of callus formation for timely healing.
So does that give you a lot of adaptability as far as who can get the plate as well? Because obviously you can work with different weight loads. Can you work with different ages and sizes and stuff like that? Just about scaling up then, I imagine.
So the beauty of the plate is it doesn't need to change the shape for small patients to large patients. And in fact, the current similar fixation devices have length ranges ranging from about 20 to 25 centimetres up to like 40 centimetres. We envisage with this plate that we'll only need possibly one, maximum 3 different plate sizes. What that means is less stock being held on shelves and that sort of thing, less issues with shelf life. Which is interesting in this move towards personalised medicine and all that and customisation. This concept actually goes a little bit the other way and says actually we can cater to more people with the one device.
Yeah, and that's something that's really good as far as manufacturing and stuff goes as well, and just having less of that variability. So what kind of things have you learned through this design process? What have been some big challenges about going through this?
I think the biggest challenges are the unknowns. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think is the broad scope, the diversity of things that you need to think about. When the project starts, all the focus is on the concept, and you work with relatively simple models, and you don't take into account any issues like manufacturability and all those sorts of things. You're purely focused on how can I achieve these optimal biomechanical conditions, these movements. As the project develops and goes to the next stage, then you start to deal with quality management and risk management, and then you move on from areas like finite element analysis and biomechanics into these areas, and you've got to become knowledgeable about those. Then as you start to move towards production, you start to deal with supply chains of, okay, where's my material coming from? How's it going to be handled? What are the impacts of those processes? And in the beginning, there are all these assumptions that, we can do that. Someone else has done it before, so we know that we can do that.
Yeah.
But always there are slight variations. Your product's slightly different. And when you encounter these things, you suddenly find out that they're not as straightforward as you imagined. And so even with, let's say, a relatively simple technology that we're developing here, there's no new material. The manufacturing processes are not even really new, but in this type of product, they are. And things that you take for granted, like it can be cleaned or surprise you.
Yeah.
And they turn out to be not as straightforward as you originally thought.
So it's definitely one of those things, if you do want to embark down the product field, is about making yourself very aware of, like, all right, this may take time, and realizing there's going to be new stuff coming at you all the time, because I think, especially as you get through uni or doing engineering, you're like, all right, well, this is the part I work on, and then after that, it's all kind of black box. So it's good to kind of have that understanding before you go into it. Yeah.
So, I mean, one, you never stop learning.
Yeah.
Like, which I think is what also makes it interesting.
Yeah.
It's constantly challenging. There's always problems to solve, but it's also very rewarding at the same time.
So we've touched a bit on the manufacturing process, and you guys are working with the AO Foundation. What was it like visiting them in Switzerland? What was it like working with manufacturers in different countries and stuff like that?
Yes, so the development of this concept is a joint effort between myself and a concept development engineer from the AO Foundation in Switzerland. They have a research institute which is up in the mountains in the Alps. It sits within it's a village, but it's at the level that you can ski and mountain bike and all these things there. I mean, that's quite a historic place. It's been around about 70 years or something now, 75 years I think, with a focus on treatment of fractures. That institute, huge worldwide network. So you get to work with people that are real specialists in the field and have a great passion for this area. And then in terms of the manufacturing, we're working with a company called NonMedical, which is located in a different area of Switzerland, sort of in the flatlands between Solothurn and Biel. This is sort of watchmaking territory. And then you understand also when you visit there the huge impact that the watchmaking industry's had on manufacturing of medical devices. And a lot of the implant manufacturers are based there because it was the watchmaking industry that learnt to work with stainless steel and machine stainless steel in high precision. And what that gave me appreciation for is that for certain product classes, it's very unlikely that a new city is just going to become a dominant player in that area. There is history involved in these things. There are supply chains, there are accessory companies that do the cleaning and sterilisation and polishing and all these sorts of things that are built around certain product classes. Yeah. So I think it's also important when you embark on developing a new product that you understand a little bit the history around those type of products and potential challenges that you may face if you try to do it in a new setting outside of things like expertise. And I think when we talk about 3D printing and additive manufacturing, we think that, oh, well, now we can do it anywhere because we have this machine. That remains to be seen, I think, because also these places are embracing those technologies as well. Yeah. But they also have long-standing knowledge of these products and industries and relationships. So I think whilst it's important to embrace new technologies, it's also important to understand the history and the impacts of those on those devices and product classes.
Yeah, there's a lot of transferable skills that would be coming from there, and I think I found it very interesting when you mentioned that, because you wouldn't expect to go looking for watch manufacturers to be where medical devices would be made. So I think definitely being aware of that, being aware of areas that might be related to engineering might be the place that you find that you can work with these people who've got these great skills in a certain area that might not be directly related to medical, but could be people you work with.
Yeah. And I think globally, like, at least in orthopedics, which is a field that I know well, manufacturers tend to be very localized. For example, there's a town in the US, Warsaw, Indiana, that is the manufacturing base for at least 3 of the big 4 orthopedic companies in the US. And that town is basically... everybody in that town works for one of those companies. Yeah. It's
like in Limerick as well. Like they've got Cook and I think Medtronic are both also. Oh no, Cook's is definitely there. Yeah.
So and it definitely has something to having a workforce that is trained in that area. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you form your partnership with the AO Foundation? Have you worked with them for a number of years, or do you know the person through other work? Or
so. I've been engaged with the AO Foundation for a long time, since the time when I was doing my PhD work in Germany. At that time, as I mentioned earlier, I was working on research into fracture healing. And at that time, so this is back in early 2000s, we had like a grouping of 3 research institutes. Ours in Berlin, there was another group in southern Germany in a place called Ulm, and Davos in Switzerland, the AO Foundation. And those 3 groups were heavily focused on the biomechanics of fracture healing, so we met frequently to discuss ideas and develop projects, collaborate. Also, many of the surgeons that led the hospital in Berlin where I worked were leading surgeons in the AO network. So the AO is also a network of surgeons. And so I've worked with AO surgeons for a long time. Specifically, what with this project happened, at the time I was working with Professor Michael Schutz, who's a trauma surgeon based in Brisbane, originally also came from Germany, from Berlin where I was at. And he's a very high up surgeon within the AO network. He met Marcus Findolf, who's this concept development engineer, through that connection to the AO that he has. And he saw the benefit of bringing him out to Australia for a year to work with me on translating some of the research that what I was doing into commercial devices. So he was somebody that was used to developing concepts, and I had all this knowledge in what bone healing needs, and we put those 2 things together, and the plate came out of that working together.
So, like when you're discussing these ideas with surgeons, what do you find you have to do with conveying like the engineering aspects or describing it? Because if you're talking to a whole bunch of engineers, you're talking in a completely different way as you would presenting it to surgeons and stuff like that.
Yeah, although typically I find surgeons, orthopedic surgeons are quite knowledgeable. I mean, yes, you got to tone down some of the lingo and things like that, but they understand the basic properties of the devices. They need to work with them. Essentially, orthopedic surgeons are mechanic carpenters. They also understand stress and strength and stiffness and all these sort of terms. But it's more so you need to demonstrate that you understand their work.
Okay.
And I think the challenge with that is, even if you've been involved with research, you deal with a very narrow range of fractures, for example. We make our experimental models simple so that they're reproducible. But it's about appreciating that fractures in the real world are diverse. That fixation technology has to do more than address one simple configuration of a fracture. It has to deal with all this variety. So the biggest thing in engaging and talking is making sure that you come across as being knowledgeable in their area.
Okay, for these plates, after the fracture's healed, are they then removed or do they stay in place? Or
that's a case-by-case thing. They should be designed to be removable, but typically if an implant's not causing any adverse symptoms, the preference would be to leave it in. There's no such thing as a routine surgery. In surgery, things can and unfortunately do go wrong. So it's can be advisable to leave it in, but on the other hand, if it's causing symptoms, pain, irritation, it needs to be taken out once it's done its job. And then also you have cultural differences, for example, as well. So in some cultures like Japan, they insist on all hardware being removed from their bodies once it's no longer functioning.
So what would be like the future of this device going forward? Would you, like, once you've gotten to market, would you be working in other areas? Like, obviously this is more for long bones, right? Yeah,
so I think this project's a long way from being over. The first implant is a version for the distal femur. And so our first priority is to prove the concept, and we've picked distal femur for that. But then there's other indications to look at, things like distal tibia, proximal humerus, possibly even proximal femur. So for a range of different long bones, there's still a fair bit of work to do to see whether this concept can be incorporated into anatomically shaped plates for different regions of the body.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things about understanding the scope of how long it takes for these projects, because it's not just, you go and figure something out and build it and then that's, ready to go. You kind of have to spend a long time making sure that it does work for all these different situations and proving that it works. And so for our last question, what would you advise people studying or working in medical engineering?
So the first thing is, for people studying, I think when you come into the degree, I think most people know very little about what they're getting themselves into. That was certainly the case when I did it. Even though I came from a very medical background, still difficult to appreciate everything that medical engineering is. So I think what you need to do is you need to take advantage of the opportunities provided at university to find out as much about what medical engineering is. We've talked about at the beginning some of that diversity, right? Some of it is really working on new technologies, but some of it is working on with existing technologies and just either making sure that they remain compliant with the regulations, or in hospitals, okay, we've got this piece of equipment which is now out of life, but we can't replace it, we need to keep it usable. How do we do so safely and keep things working? So there's this huge spectrum, and as an individual you've got to work out why you're here, what interests you, what do you want to do, And you can only do that to some extent by taking on opportunities, work experiences, and trying to understand what you like, what you're good at.
Yeah.
And of course, the other thing to consider is, in terms of ultimately your career, where you're going to go, is where are you, what restrictions or opportunities are open to you. In my own pathway, I went overseas and spent a long time in Germany training before I came back. So to pursue certain areas, to get involved in certain fields, it may require you to travel, it may require to go overseas. Are you open to doing that, or are you more centred and grounded here? So understanding how things that are important to you personally may also impact on the avenues and opportunities you can pursue.
Yeah.
So
I think it's amazing that the diversity you can get. Like, you can go to Berlin and study. So I definitely think it's definitely getting out there and making use of those experiences is a really good thing.
Yeah. And one other thing about, I think, the medical engineering sector, which is a bit different to others, is often in some sectors, take automotive, for example, it's the big established companies are just as involved in innovation as, maybe some of the smaller startups. You can talk about Tesla, but at the same time, BMW, Mercedes, all these guys are hugely investing in autonomous driving and electric vehicles as well. But you don't find this so much anymore in medical device companies. And the reason for this is the risk of new products is too great.
Yeah.
So people often have the impression of, I want to work with big established companies because in other fields, they've got reputation, they've got stability, they do innovation. But that's changed in medical in the last 10 years.
Interesting.
And if you want to do something exciting and innovative, it's likely that you're going to have to do it in a startup.
Yeah, okay.
Because like the journey that we're on, a big player will not take on a technology until it's proven clinically. So it'll be the job of startups to develop it, to manufacture it, to do clinical trials, to de-risk the product, to show that surgeons want to use it, that it performs before it gets taken to mass. So essentially the big companies, the Medtronics, the Strykers, the Johnson Johnsons, they're essentially distributors.
Yeah. Okay.
They're no longer, the innovation internally that they maybe once were.
They're like distributors and maintainers, and just make sure that everything ticks along and keeps going along and keep it all right.
Well, they've got the marketing reach, in every market. So once something's proven, they can scale it very fast, much faster than a startup can.
Yeah.
But if they introduce a product like what happened with the metal-on-metal hips about 5 or so years ago now, or longer, they took a gamble on a different technology.
Yeah.
It didn't go the way they thought, and it exposed the entire company to the lawsuits and things that followed. They're just not going to do that again.
Yeah.
So
definitely don't, especially once you've had that kind
so
of...
rather it's more of an approach of let somebody else do it and then acquire them.
Yeah. So do you find a lot of the startups are becoming acquired now, or any startups that keep on going, or is it more just like they get to a certain point and then you find that the big companies come?
That depends on... Well, my guess is that depends on how revolutionary your technology is. If you are a startup doing, a niche or a Me Too product, you're likely to stay by yourself because a big company's only going to take you on and take you to scale if you're going to impact their bottom line. Again, these companies are largely shareholder driven.
Yeah. So,
for example, the sector that I work in, Synthes, the trauma company owned by Johnson Johnson, has roughly 45-50% of the fracture fixation device market. Wow. So in order for them to want to acquire us, they have to see that acquiring our product over what they existingly have is going to drive a change.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to move 50% market share.
Yeah. Yeah. It has to be something where...
You know, it's not like somebody who's got 2% who's trying to grow it to 5%. You know, it's...
And it's definitely something, for example, where your device could have, 3 main sizes. For them, they might see the benefits of changing to that device where they've got, 10 sizes, because that's the cost of that can compound over their whole inventories and distributions and stuff like that. So,
Sure, there are things like that, and but possibly what's more important is companies like Johnson & Johnson, they want to present themselves as being innovative.
Yeah.
And whilst they're not necessarily doing it internally, they can present themselves as being innovative by acquiring new products.
Yeah.
And so much is driven by marketing, and presenting yourself as being a state-of-the-art company. So there is pressure. Whilst on the one hand I said, you've got to weigh up, is this going to impact the bottom line? On the other side, there's how do we present ourselves as being innovative and constantly, advancing the standard of fracture care.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for chatting to me, Devakar. It's lovely to chat to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for Devakar for sitting down and having a chat with us. A lot of really interesting things about how to choose your majors in the medical fields. So definitely have a look at those things of mechanical, electrical with medical minors, or different combinations to suit what you're interested in. Also some really interesting things about how to use your assignments for job interviews and how to study throughout your degree. And then we also discussed his project on the fracture fixation plate and the medical device industry. So thank you very much for listening. Look forward to seeing you sometime soon. Thank you. Bye.